Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan Maiden.
But what's more impressive to me about the
Case
fact
Thornton.
Yeah, I mean, I got it.
Chris Dowhouse.
Get him, Chase.
And Adam
No,
LaRue.
not necessarily, but it's the same as...
Don't hope to win. Be great and dominate.
But let's get into the running backs of this NFC West division and start off with none other than CMC. Everyone has him at number one, except for me. Look, I wish there was a 1A, 1B situation here that I could put. I don't really want to say Christian McCaffrey's my number two running back. I would put him 1A, 1B with Bijan Robinson. I'm looking at Kyron's stats, who we're going to talk about in a second. I'm kind of projecting those tendencies on the Bijan with his youth, with not having as much concern about the team actively not wanting to overwork him, like the 49ers don't want to overwork Christian McCaffrey, and that's ultimately my tying factor. Am I going to be shocked McCaffrey is number one? No, I'm not going to be shocked if McCaffrey is number one overall. But Bob, a few comments on him because he is getting a little bit older. He's coming off a season with over 400 touches total, and you still have no concerns.
No, none that I didn't already have, and those concerns are always there. Something you said, like Kyle Shanahan talking like we want to lighten his load a little bit. 272 carries last year, tied for second most in the NFL, the most touches. And sure, they would like to not give him as many touches. I wrote about this at Football Guys last week, and I said like this. I also would like to eat less cake. Yet when presented with cake, I turn in a clean plate every single time because cake is fantastic. So is Christian McCaffrey. It's going to be hard for them to take you. You don't take your most dangerous weapon off the field except when you can. And so maybe we see a little bit of that, but I don't think enough to keep him. The key for me is he is a player and a half. And at what level is he a player and a half? Running back 5 last year was the guy who he was player and a half over. I mean, that's a huge leverage over the field. I'm not going to, if I have the first pick overall, I'm not going to give up on that. It's not happening. And like, we all know what can happen. Jonathan Taylor would like us to know that running back, the consensus running back 1 can have a down year, right? So, it can happen, but it's hard not to invest in it for me.
Well, and for him, it wasn't just the volume, right? He was amazingly efficient.
Super good.
Yeah, first in evaded tackles, 5.4 yards per carry, 6 yards per touch, fourth in breakaway rate. So he could get less touches, be just as efficient, be much of a scoring monster. Again, this is me just pumping up Bijan, not trying to pump down Christian McCaffrey.
Well, Breece Hall's number 2, like Andrea says. Everyone knows that. Come on.
No. Breece Hall's my number 4. I got him actually one spot below Jonathan Taylor. I don't get too much of a tangent on it, but he's going to see less catches this season. Doesn't mean he's not going to be
not going to get those 90 targets. That's true.
No, he's not. But let's keep it in the NFC West because we don't have too much time to go on a tangent, unfortunately. Kyron Williams, he's somebody we need to talk about. Big, controversial flag planter, if you will, like you said early, Bob, for a lot of people in this one. Adam, you got him at RB13. You're the lowest of the group. You're the only one of the group who has him outside of the top 12. So speak to some of the concerns you have about him being a top 12 running back in ADP.
I'm once again, can't label me a Notre Dame truther. Every time we talk about draft prospects, I come in the lowest on Kyron.
He's no Audric Estime. You're right.
Exactly.
He's no Audric
Estime. No, look, I love Kyron. 2 things, and one of them we're going to get back to here in a minute. This whole tier of running backs is one that it's the tier that I think of any position group, any tier is the one that I'm going to tinker with the most going into the season, just because there's a lot of old guys, a lot of guys in competitions, a lot of X, Y, Z. Between like 8 and 18 in the running backs, there's a lot of movement that could happen. So I want to throw that out there. And for Kyron specifically, my biggest concern is that kind of what you were saying with Christian McCaffrey, the exact reason that they drafted Blake Corum is we have this small dude that we need to give a ton of volume, but also we're a little afraid of giving him volume. And I hope that they come to the same realization that you did, that Kyron's awesome. Let's just give him the ball. I'm afraid that what we're going to see is the frustration of, there's the Kyron long run and Corum's coming in to punch it into the end zone, because that's of the areas that I see Corum potentially having either an advantage of or being, I think they're similar players in a lot of ways, but if you're looking for a potential advantage for Corum, it's probably on the red zone, to be honest with you. And I could see not necessarily, okay, he's the goal line back, but if Kyron got us here and we don't want him to be worn down, him maybe getting the end of drives sometimes, especially coming after long runs, things of that nature. I don't necessarily think that, again, he's going to steal touchdowns as a goal line back, but I do think that, you could see him snipe some touchdowns that in annoying fashion. But we'll see. I want to see how, through camp, that relationship ends up being, what that usage ends up being. So,
I mean, and to be fair, you are highest ranked on Blake Corum out of the group of us, which makes sense with your consistency there where you have Kyron Williams at. Bob, anything you want to add to that?
Again, if smart drafters are chasing volume at the higher end of the running back ranks, if you believe that Kyron Williams is going to get the 20 plus touches a game he got, or better still, the 25 a game he got down to the final 5 games, which allowed him to be running back 2 over that span, then you're going to be super happy. If you think Blake Corum is a threat to that, I know, one other possibility is the games he missed, the 4 games he was on IR, they lost 3 of those because they couldn't run the football. I mean, I think that's why Blake Corum is there. That doesn't mean that's the only reason Blake Corum is there and that he can't at some point cut in the workload. And that's the obvious concern here. Can Blake Corum cut in the workload? The history is going back to Todd Gurley. McVay picks a lane and he stays. He keeps driving that same, he'll drive the wheels off his guy. So that's the hope if you're on the optimistic side. If you're on the other side of that and you fear Corum, it's understandable. If you want to draft Corum late, for the contingent upside, which would be about an 80% share of that workload. If something were to happen to Kyron Williams, I am not against that either.
Yeah, I think everybody would agree that Blake Corum, at the very least, is a 1-for-1 handcuff for Kyron Williams. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And look, if you want to make the argument, some have, that Blake Corum is more talented, we'll have to wait and see. He hasn't played a snap yet in the NFL, and Kyron Williams is pretty productive. But you can make the argument Blake Corum was a better athlete in his combine profile, but so was a lot of people over Kyron Williams in the NFL. So kind of take that for what you will. I do think Blake Corum, at the very least, is a 1-for-1 handcuff. We'll see if he works into the workload. But I'm with you, Bob. Sean McVay, typically, if he has a guy he trusts, now he didn't fully trust Cam Akers. That was part of the problem. If you have a guy he trusts, he usually sticks with that guy until the wheels fall off. To Adam, to your point, I think the question is, do the wheels fall off and does Blake Corum run away with the job at that point? That remains to be seen. But I still like Kyron in the top 10. When we move on to Seattle and we talk a little Kenneth Walker, we are a little more spread out on the board in this one. Chris, you have him actually inside your top 12, despite the coaching change, despite you still have the factor of Zach Charbonnet, who of course is going to work in at least to some degree. So what makes you confident about Kenneth Walker as a top 12 running back?
I don't know if I'm super confident in him. Kenneth Walker to me is one of those guys that's that RB, 2 option starting off that RB2s that you're happy with. He's got the upside to be an RB1. He's got the floor to kind of be at least be a flex option for you. But he's one of those guys that you're still kind of to determine what's going to be on the offense. But what you did see in Washington is, they're known for their passing attack. They usually featured one running back. They were able to utilize the running attack pretty efficiently. They were able to utilize their guys for lots of touchdowns. Dallas Johnson had over 16 touchdowns rushing, I believe, last year in college. So it's something they do look to utilize as guys. My concern overall is, of course, the Charbonnet usage. But, Kenneth Walker is a guy that I feel like, Adam talked about, is one of those running backs in that second part tier where it can kind of slide up or down depending on what I hear out of camp. But a guy, as long as he's the starter in the offense, I think is going to be pretty productive. I think he's got an opportunity to be effective. He's got those, even if he's a guy who only gets 15 touches because of the explosiveness, he might be able to still be a good threat for you to have in your offense. So I don't love upside as a RB1 per se as a touchdown opportunity guy, but as a guy who I feel confident in my lineup week in, week out, Kenneth Walker is one of those guys.
Now, Bob, do you see it any differently? Not that you're not confident in him, but you do have him more as a back in RB2.
I think so. I'll go with this. He is. I think he's that. The level of talent is that Chris's number is the talent. The role and maybe the anticipated workload for me maybe diminishes a bit here with Ryan Grubb coming in, and we'll see if Charbonnet can cut into it. I mean, this is also was a thing that was great about Pete Carroll was he would get his guy and then he would draft another guy who everyone would be scared of, but Pete would stick with his guy until he could not stick with him any longer. And then the next guy comes up and then he would draft another guy to make you nervous about that guy. So, but yeah, so I think that's the range of outcomes for Walker is yes, he needs some big plays. Also, he's capable of delivering those big plays. The offensive line was a little bit suspect last year. Maybe it'll be a little better this year. But I'm worried about the change of offense, and that's why my ranking is. I don't think it's the talent level. I think it's the scheme level for me.
Chase, you have him ranked in the exact same spot. Do you want to add anything to what Bob just said?
No, I agree that like his talent level is that of reaching into RB1 territory. I just, I don't think they would have drafted Zach Charbonnet a couple years ago if they thought that Kenneth Walker could do it all the time and be that workhorse running back that you have to be to break into number one territory. I'm comfortable with him as my running back 2, but I can't go any higher than a mid to low running back 2. And that's just his role, unfortunately. And with the new Ryan Grubb offense, if they want to, this is a team that ran the ball the second fewest times of any team in the NFL last season. We don't necessarily expect them to be winning all of their games this season. So they may be behind. They may be passing more anyway, let alone then we talk about Ryan Grubb's offense coming in and Kalen DeBoer's offense, I guess you could call it actually. But I just don't see necessarily the role there for Kenneth Walker to elevate him past a mid to low running back 2 at this point.
Yeah, just to give guys some ideas, if you don't already know what the splits kind of were between Walker and Charbonnet last season, Walker out carried Zach Charbonnet, a 67 to 34% split on the ground. Their target share was actually about the same, 8% target share each. Now, Zach Charbonnet ranked 8th in the NFL in routes run and 11th in route participation. He was on the field much more in passing situations. It just didn't lead to additional target share. And the big thing is the new regime change, right? We don't know how this new regime are going to view these 2 running backs and how they're going to utilize them. We know that Kenneth Walker has been was the guy last season, is explosive enough to where we expect him to be the starter at the very least, right, for this upcoming year. How much Charbonnet gets into that, nobody truly knows, but we know Walker's explosive enough, as Chris mentioned, that it's unlikely, I think, in my opinion, that he would lose that job barring injury. But I will say with Zach Charbonnet, kind of like the Blake Corum situation at the very least, I think we do view him as a 1-for-1 handcuff. Last year, weeks 12 and 13, when Kenneth Walker missed, Zach Charbonnet was the RB16 over the course of those 2 weeks, getting 18 opportunities and 21 opportunities in those 2 games. So we know if something happens to Walker, Charbonnet is very capable of handling an all 3 down back workload. Now we get into our first showdown of the evening. All right. You guys know how this works. If you're part of the Operation Domination show, we're going to present our 2 cases. And in this case, Bob's going to be the one judging the argument between Chris and I over James Conner. And we're going to try to tie in a little Trey Benson analysis in that as well. I am the lowest on the board here, admittedly, on James Conner. I have him ranked at 27th. Chris has him at 15th. So we're operating on 2 very different tiers here at an RB3 and a mid-level RB2. So Chris, why are you confident in James Conner again this season?
Well, I liked what I saw last year, Dan. Number 1, he averaged 5 yards per carry, which is pretty impressive for a guy that we're trying to knock him for being older or going to lose his job possibly this year. Usually guys that average 5 yards per carry go over 1,000 yards is kind of hard to replace. And is at the floor. I think James Conner showed you at the end of the season, the 5-game stretch there where he had 22.5, 16.4, 19.7, 25.8, and 28.4 for your life playoff run. That's a nice little playoff run, a guy that you had for James Conner, an offense that we saw Arizona kind of find itself. Even with Kyler Murray, throwing the ball more often and doing different things that we kind of talked about earlier in the show, James Conner was still very effective. And what we saw him be effective with is running the ball down very effectively, but he also caught the ball in the backfield, which James Conner can do. So I look at a guy as one of those last of the opportunities be the bell cow backs. I just want to clarify something too. Once we get outside the top 5, basically, running back situation, you're going to have a lot of guys who are going to be 65, 35, 60, 40. That's going to be the norm moving forward. So I'm looking for the guys who are going to have the upside with that 60%, 65% touches of things. And this is where I see a guy that I think at least he's going to have those touches barring a major injury. Trey Benson is a good player. I think he'll be factored in. But we saw last year Michael Carter got factored in towards the end of the season. We saw DeMarco get factored in 2 weeks previous to that. So they were involved in the passing attack. They're involved in the rushing attack. To say that they got about 10, 12 touches about combined between the 2 running backs was about what you saw. So there is room for James Conner to have some things taken away from him as well and still eat. I'm not aiming him to be quite as high as he was last year, like I said, but I feel like a guy that I have a pretty consistent feel for as long as he's healthy. And that's a key thing for James Conner, so I can't argue that strongly. But if James Conner is healthy, and look at a lot of other names are getting drafted around the same time he is, a lot of guys have injury questions too. I'm going to lean with the guy that I liked what I saw most on tape last year, and a guy who I see upside in his offense.
Yeah, I mean, look, Chris, there's a few things that I do agree with you, despite having James Conner ranked much lower. He did look impressive towards the end of last year. I think you missed the drop the mic moment. He was RB1 from week 13 on. He was very impressive towards the late end of last season. And of course, his efficiency was the best it ever has been in his career. I mean, he had 5 yards a carry, and that's way over what he's usually at, which is usually 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, somewhere in that range in his first season going over 1,000 yards. So I don't disagree with anything there. My ranking of 27th for James Conner is not so much a reflection of what I think you're going to get on a week-to-week basis when he is healthy and playing, or throughout, let's say, the month of September, maybe even October. You're going to get probably more closer to where you have him ranked at RB15 in production during those weeks. And last year, he finished the RB9 on a points per game basis. But it was all due to that late surge from week 13 on in that 5-game little stretch. In the first part of the season, the first 12 weeks of the season, he missed 4 games, which I'm going to touch a little bit more about that in a second. But even the other 8 games during those first 12 weeks, he was only the RB36 on a points per game basis. So it was a very uneven season for James Conner. Yes, he did much better once Kyler Murray started to get back into the mix a little bit more, and perhaps he was a little bit healthier. I'm not going to knock him too much for that, but he is turning age 29. This is a running back who's never played an entire season. And I think more so this is what would deter me and why I have him ranked at 27th and more concerned about over the back half of the year. Because he's a player who has missed now 4 games in back-to-back seasons, it's not a matter of if, but when he's going to miss time. Trey Benson is a talent profile that hasn't been around James Conner for quite some time. He represents more of a threat than we have seen. I didn't realize Chris has jumped off the screen here. Hopefully we'll get him back in just a second before the showdown's over. But he is somebody who represents more touches to be taken away from James Conner than what we've seen over recent seasons, especially while he's been in Arizona. So here's my thing with Conner. While he would get injured, it was never a question as to whether or not he will get his job back when he's ready to come back. I think that can be more of a question now. James Conner's on the last year of his contract. Normally speaking, that would actually be a positive for me. But because I don't think the Cardinals are in a position to be winning now, they may look at it and say, hey, if Trey Benson comes in while James Conner's out and he's playing a hell of a game, they may look to move this offense forward with their future stars in Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison and Trey Benson. And he kind of gets phased out as a result because of whatever time he missed, and Benson looks impressive. I think it's more of a threat than it has been in years past. So that's why I have Conner more ranked at 27th, reflecting what I think might happen over the second half of the season, potentially. I thought I was going to have Trey Benson ranked the highest of the group. Actually, Adam does, but I do have him inside the top 40. So with all that, Bob, you go ahead and judge the debate here.
I'm glad Chris made it back for this epic win. It was a destruction of Dan. It was horrifying to see. I feel bad. I was shedding tears as I saw how badly Dan was getting beaten. No, like obviously the range of possible outcomes we have covered quite well. You got a bad day to get an injury agnostic judge. But you know, and we'll talk about Trey Benson. But anytime you have a guy, when we're talking about the speed, when there's a 3 after the 4, I get really excited. And so I'm excited about Trey Benson at 216 pounds. I think this year his best hope is as a receiving back, third down back, barring something happening to Conner, which, you laid it out. It does happen. I'm hoping it doesn't happen. I like him as a running back too. I think, coming off the career year, he said it the other day. We mentioned the floor. He said that is the floor. We're offense that Drew Petzing brought with him that makes the difference for me.
Yeah, you can't argue with that necessarily there. Chris, you get the win on that one. There we go. Now I can turn my sound effects up. That's better.